We have the rest of the museum here. My grandfather in some of his major fights. What happened was after my grandfather realized that his new techniques, his modified variation was very effective in his early 20s, he began challenging to fight all the toughest martial artists in Brazil, all the wrestlers and all the boxers, and he beat these guys who were much heavier than him, much heavier, sometimes up to 100 pounds heavier, and by defeating these people he became very famous very quickly in Brazil. So what happened was the Brazilian press interviewed this man here who was a former wrestler, asking him his opinion of the Gracie brothers. And this wrestler lied in the newspaper and said that the Gracie brothers do fixed fights. That there's no way a little teeny guy could beat somebody 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 pounds heavier. It was fixed, they weren't real. That was his claim. The claim wasn't true. My grandfather wasn't very happy, Carlos wasn't very happy, so guess what? The Gracie brothers found this guy at a local gym, and while the brothers held the crowd back, my grandfather beat the daylights out of the guy, punished him for saying what he did about the Gracie family name. So after he beat him up so bad, single-handedly, and the guy was bigger than my grandfather, after he pummeled this guy, the guy was so kind of demoralized and humiliated that he went to court, lied, and said that all the Gracie brothers jumped him at the same time. This wasn't true. It was just him by himself. But because he was able to convince the jury that it was all 5 brothers, they all got condemned to 2.5 years in prison for jumping the guy, which, again, it didn't actually go down that way. So, of course, they went to jail, and the president, because this was a huge deal, these national celebrities, sports heroes at the time, sports icons, got put into prison. The president quickly found out, the president of Brazil quickly found out that the Gracie brothers were in jail, conducted a secondary research investigation, and concluded that it didn't take 5 Gracie brothers to beat anybody. So this picture you have here is after 2 weeks in jail, the president gave the Gracie brothers a presidential pardon and allowed them to get out. And this is the public celebrating the release of the Gracie brothers after spending a couple weeks in jail. So no big deal, and everything was good to go. This right here is when my grandfather jumped into shark-infested waters to save a man's life who fell overboard, and of course was given Medal of Honor and all kinds of different things for his daring and bold act. This right here was when Japanese Jiu-Jitsu champion Masahiko Kimura, the most powerful Jiu-Jitsu champion ever to come out of Japan, basically went to Brazil on tour with his kind of right-hand man, Kato, and my grandfather basically wanted to fight Kimura, so he challenged him. Kimura, who was much heavier than my grandfather, 80 pounds heavier than my grandfather, denied or declined the challenge because he was so confident that he would beat my grandfather so easily, and my grandfather wasn't ranked internationally, so there was no need to prove anything against him. Just a small Brazilian guy was what Kimura thought. So Kimura said, listen, why don't you fight the number 2 man, why don't you fight Kato, he'll beat you just as easy as I would. And this is Kato sleeping as a result of a choke that my grandfather put on his neck 6 minutes into the fight that they had. So my grandfather beat the number 2 man, which meant Kato, number 1, which meant Kimura had to accept the challenge. So the fight was set for a later date at the Maracanã Stadium in Brazil, the largest soccer stadium in Brazil and in the world at the time. And it was set to go down. Kimura was so confident that he would defeat my grandfather so quickly that he claimed in the newspaper if my grandfather could last for 3 minutes without giving up, without tapping out, that should declare him the winner. So the fight was set for 2 rounds of 10 minutes, 20-minute fight. And the fight went much longer than anybody expected. It went the whole first round. He threw my grandfather in every possible direction but could not submit him. My grandfather's defense was very good. And in the second round, 3 minutes in, he caught my grandfather in the shoulder lock, which today bears his name, the Kimura shoulder lock. And Kimura won the fight. So the conclusion was that if they were the same weight class, my grandfather felt that his technique was superior in many ways, but that fact that Kimura was so much heavier and was able to draw the fight out for so long was the reason for his victory. Kimura was very impressed, went to my grandfather the next day and invited him to teach in Japan with him. Of course, my grandfather, not wanting to leave Brazil, declined the offer, but was honored nonetheless. Cool statue here of my grandfather, 1951, I think. And some more fights over here. This is one of the most epic battles in the history of fighting. It's when my grandfather faced a former student who was 40 pounds heavier and 20 years younger than him, Valdemar Santana. They fought for 3 hours and 45 minutes. One continuous round without any water breaks or stoppages. So Longest fight, uninterrupted fight of all time. This is the original Gracie Academy they had in Rio. Some photos there. My grandfather stretching. The brothers playing around over here. My grandfather teaching the Brazilian Marines. This is a house they had in Brazil that had 18 bathrooms and 21 bedrooms. Huge deal. Had 18 employees who lived here full time and ran the operation. But this is where the previous generation grew up. Unfortunately, I never had a chance to visit this place because it was torn down before I was born. But they would train jiu-jitsu on the grass there, on a little tarp. And my dad just tells me all the stories, so it felt like I grew up there, even though I've never been there. So it's all good. This is all taking place in Brazil in 1978. My father came to America and began teaching classes out of his garage, and little by little started getting the word out. More and more people started hearing about it, and before you knew it, he had 130 students in his garage. After 10 years, he had 130 students, 80 people on a waiting list, and that's when he decided to open the Gracie Academy headquarters here in Torrance, California, where we now are. And in 1993 is when my dad had the idea to put real fights on television so that people all over the world could finally see what style of martial arts really worked and which styles didn't. So he developed, of course, the Ultimate Fighting Championship with that objective. These are the original hand-drawn sketches of what would eventually become the Octagon. This is some of the brochures from the first UFC, some of the information here. And of course, Royce went in there at 178 pounds, defeated the guys much heavier than him, proving that the only reliable way for a little person to realistically defeat a larger, more athletic opponent was with the leverage-based techniques of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. So that was a huge success, and that put us on the map. And today everyone does Jiu-Jitsu because they know that you can't defeat a larger opponent without it. And since then, the U.S. Army has contacted my father. And here's a cool picture. Check this one out. This is a picture here of my father, my uncle Holker, my uncle Hanzo, who lives in New York. Helion is in Miami, Florida. Pedro Valente runs the Gracie Academy in Miami as well. Royce, Carlos Machado, Hickson, Helson, he lives in Hawaii, and Hoyler is in Brazil. And there's my brothers Hiron and Halek, and a little action figure that was made in Japan of my uncle Hickson, and then Hanzo's gloves from the Pride Championships. And then out here, if you follow me, we also have this is all the military and law enforcement branches that we've taught over the years. Everyone from the U.S. Army Rangers, Secret Service, Navy SEALs, you name it. I mean, we've taught them all, and that's been a great honor for us. My brother just got back from Iraq, spent 10 days in Iraq teaching 500 soldiers over a 10-day period, and you know, it's all good. It's all good. So we're gonna go right now, check out the class, show a couple techniques, and you know, check us out on the mat. Let's go.